Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. My name is Kelly Kay, and today we have the amazing Melissa Coates, one of my favorite people, period, and also one of the smartest people I know. She's going to be going through increasing trustworthiness of our Power BI content. She's going to teach us a few tips and tricks. And then I just wanted to give you a plug, Melissa, because I know you have this fantastic document that you've created that I always reference, and it has the entire environment in it. So I love all of those great educational and training resources that you have for us. So if anyone has an opportunity to look that up, go look it up, because Melissa's just put this great document together to show the environment and how it works with all of the inputs and outputs, and gives you a good overview. But anyhow, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Melissa, and thank you again for having this session today.
Right. So like Kelly said, my name is Melissa Coates, and my specialty is all around Power BI, governance, administration, security, deployment, that kind of thing. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about this particular topic. Here's what we're planning to do today. We're going to start a little bit about why and what we mean by trustworthiness, and then we're going to go through a few different topics about shared data sets, data flows. Then we're going to build on that with composite models. Then we're going to continue building on it more with certification. Finally, we're going to get to separating workspaces, and then we're going to wrap up with a few tips of how you can help your consumers understand that you just went through a whole heck of a lot of work, and how to convey that to them. If you would like a copy of these slides that I'm going through here today, you can go to my website, the presentations page, and it's coatesdatastrategies.com or coatesds.com for short. And you'll find it right at the top of the presentations page. And with that, let's dig in finally to some content. So let's start with, how are we approaching BI to begin with? And generally we think of these three different ways that we can deploy BI. The first being from a very centralized or enterprise BI type of approach on the left. On the right, more of a fully decentralized type of approach, and then something in the middle that blends those two. And the thing that makes that relevant for this particular conversation is because two things really. Just because it's centralized does not implicitly make it more trustworthy, unless we also have good processes behind it for testing, change management, etc. And if it's owned and managed by IT, BI teams, center of excellence, something like that, we would usually assume that those sort of processes are in place, at least to a certain extent. Now, the other relevant thing here is that more authors throughout the organization, so as we move to the right on this diagram, the more people that are publishing content has a very big impact on trustworthiness. So this middle approach here, the Power BI team and Microsoft talks about it as discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge. And a lot of times that's spoken from, IT or a centralized team owns and manages the data. And while that's very common and very true, my thing that I want to convey to you is that really any content author can take advantage of the kinds of techniques we're going to talk about with regard to managing data in a way to improve its trustworthiness aspects. Now, trustworthiness itself is a key pillar of governance, which of course is a much bigger conversation. But really, we're talking about having the right data available for the right people, the right way, and for the right reason. We're only focusing on trustworthiness in this conversation, right? And what exactly do we mean by that? Do we just mean, we double checked the data's right? Yep, we're good. And I'm going to say it's more than that. So let's start first with, yes, the biggie. We are verifying accuracy of the data. We're scrutinizing it for quality. Perhaps how timely we're delivering it kind of falls under this umbrella as well. You're also using common definitions, right? So to make sure that your data is understandable, complete, consistent. We have assigned responsibility and ownership of the data to one or more people, depending on how you do that in your organization. We know how the data has changed and moved over time with regard to its lineage. And one of my favorite topics, the data is not duplicated unnecessarily. We are properly managing and securing our data load processes, our data management processes, and this includes if we're using Power BI end to end. Maybe that includes we automate what we can whenever possible, because whenever we remove manual effort, we reduce our risk and we improve our trustworthiness. These last two are actually out of scope for this conversation today, but I'll include them from a completeness perspective anyways. Having your content discoverable and findable by authorized people means that you have it documented and cataloged, and that can also improve kind of the overall trustworthiness status. And then finally, clear expectations about how do you responsibly use this particular set of data. And in Power BI, a lot of that right now revolves around sensitivity labels and assigning policies for what we can and can't do with different labels. We're not going to get into the last two today, but trustworthiness here today for today's scope, we're really focusing on making sure the content you produce is reliable. And security per se, although we're going to touch on it really briefly, is technically kind of a different topic as far as this is concerned. Let's start with talking about shared data sets. Now, where a lot of Power BI authors will start their journey is one Power BI file per report or set of reports. So before you know it, you might have a whole bunch of Power BI files and every single one of them has its own data set. And notice that the three examples that I have here, they're all sales data. But we have these different report purposes or use cases, if you will. And this is a natural place to start, but it's something that we want authors to progress past at some point. Now, the place that some authors might adjust to or might even kind of intuitively know, oh, I don't want to maintain three data sets. They might start with, in one Power BI file, I'm going to have just a whole bunch of reports. And while that's great from a reducing the maintenance of data sets perspective, the report gets really unwieldy for your consumers when you've got 20, 30 report pages inside the same file. Therefore, I propose that our goal is the habit change of decoupling data and reports. And this really is a habit change, and it requires training. More experienced authors, we want them to make that conscious decision of, is a single Power BI file for the data and the reports appropriate for this use case? Or should I look at decoupling them into, in this example, I'm showing here 4 different Power BI files. And this is something that if you're training your internal users, you won't necessarily introduce this idea on day one of training, but I would introduce the idea and at least have people thinking about it before you conclude your introductory Power BI author training so that they don't accidentally get into the state of suddenly I have 25 PBIX files and a lot of work to consolidate. So let's use an example. Let's say I've got a shared data set, and I'm just going to call it sales data, and I've got a couple of reports that are going to connect to it. We do that through live connection to a shared data set. And by that, that means here with the 3 blue boxes, there are 3 Power BI desktop files, and that because it's a live connection, we are not reproducing or copying any of that data again into the local Power BI file where the report lives. We can also do this same kind of thing using Analyze in Excel, where we reuse a shared data set that's already published. And a lot of people talk about this technique online. So if you've heard the term golden data set with thin reports, a lot of bloggers and people in the community use that terminology. Less people, but we also might think about it as a hub and spoke kind of methodology. This is where we want to start focusing on. And Some key advantages of doing this is it really does enable our self-service BI folks, because think about it, if we're decoupling these PBIX files, that means it's so much easier for different people to take responsibility for the data modeling work and the report creation work, because they're working independently in their own files. And that fundamentally promotes that idea of discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge that we talked about at the very beginning. So it aligns well with managed self-service BI. But it doesn't have to be only IT managing that shared data set, right? Somebody in accounting that produces data sets for the whole accounting group to use can absolutely use this technique. It also reduces your risk, fewer inconsistencies. It's reducing your maintenance and effort of change when something new comes along, like you have to adjust a measure or add some columns in a table. You have to do less data validations, right? Because it's all in one single shared data set. And fundamentally, when you're duplicating the data less, our governance, compliance kinds of concerns, they don't go away, but they are somewhat diminished. For instance, let's say you need to find everywhere you're using customer name, right? Would you rather have to sort it out in one shared data set file or 20 of them? It improves usability for your report consumers, right? Because we have decided to create reports per use case, and the report pages are appropriate for that use case. And performance, we have fewer data refreshes. And if you have picky source systems, or you're often waiting on your data refreshes in Power BI for one reason or another, this is big and, fundamentally less to maintain and worry about in Power BI from that aspect. And it gives us more security options as well. These separate Power BI files, we might want to publish them to different workspaces, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. And that means we can do the workspace security roles separately if we want to, and we can share individual reports separately if we want to. Now, it wouldn't be fair if we didn't say there are a few disadvantages or at least things to know about or things that you want to consider. And certainly something like this means we are favoring having a solid process over speed of delivery. Absolutely, no question about it. If you're using a shared data set across a number of different reports, it should have a little extra oversight and change management. And you don't want that for every single data set. If I have a new data set I'm firing up and I know it's only going to live for 3 months because we're thinking about, do we want to analyze opening a new location? I might not want to go through the extra process that this requires. Now, the other thing is when we start to talk about centralizing data, somebody's got to take ownership and responsibility of it. And if it's not you, that other team might have different priorities, and you may or may not be able to affect change on that data set as well. Now, we do have a brand spanking new way to cope with that called direct query for Power BI data sets. And we're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes. But to be fair, if we're just using straight up live connection to a shared data set like this, we have some limitations. And then the other thing that you might just want to watch out for a little bit is a tad bit of complacency. And what I mean by that is somebody who's creating reports, they're busy, they're moving fast, and they say, oh, I used that golden data set. It's been validated. I know I'm good. And they don't do adequate report testing. And the problem is that visuals can still be misleading. Report level measures, we can still create them. Direct query for Power BI data sets allows even more. So it doesn't mean that we don't have any risk for report errors and we don't have to test our reports. So let's take a look at a couple things really quickly out here in the Power BI service. And if I start in this workspace, what I want to do is go to a data set that I call sales data, which is right here. And what I've done is I've clicked on this little icon right there to look at the impact analysis. And what I can see is that there are a number of different reports that depend on this particular data set. So this is what we're doing is downstream impact analysis from the data set to the reports. And we can see, which reports have the most views. And this is the last 30 days, that kind of thing. And if we wanted to, we could even send a notification to the contacts of all those reports, whether I have access to see them or not, and let them know something's about to change to this sales data set. So it's kind of a downstream impact analysis. If we look instead at more of a lineage where we're looking back upstream, what I'm looking at here is starting from where my reports live, which is a separate workspace, and we'll talk about that here shortly. And so here we can kind of see that the upstream data set for them is the sales data set. So depending on where our starting place is, right, the data set we're looking down, or the reports and we're looking up, we get a little bit of a different view in the Power BI service. All right, if you all have any questions while we are moving along, we'll stop another few times before we get to the end. So I will push on, and let's talk data flows next. So let's go back to that idea of, I have everything in one PBIX file, and here I'm showing two of them. And we authors know that inside the PBIX to formulate a data set, we have our transform data area, basically our query editor or Power Query, to create a data model, create the relationships, et cetera, et cetera. If you find yourself doing that kind of data preparation, the transform data work, in various PBIX files, maybe you even have a personal little M script library where you copy and paste stuff between Power BI files. This is for you. So if we take this starting point, let's say I've got 3 shared data sets across 5 different reports, right? Because my position is, if we're going to use shared data sets, we want to reduce the number of data sets, but I don't necessarily say that we always need one huge monolithic data set, right? It can be a good balance. So instead of repeating the data preparation steps that are similar across all 3 of those data sets, what we're going to do is move that work into data flows. And in this case, I'm just calling it a customer master data flow. And that's done in Power Query Online. So we're pulling that work out of being done inside the Power BI file and up being done inside the web browser in the Power Query Online service. So then what happens is each shared data set just uses the data flow as a source, and it doesn't have to do the work on its own. So as you can imagine, we have a lot of the same kind of benefits that we've talked about back with shared data sets. One being different people can handle data preparation because we've decoupled one step further again. It shields your data set authors from those really persnickety source systems that are just plain hard to query. Almost all of us have them. And fundamentally reduces the effort for data set authors because some of the data is basically pre-processed for them. And we can reuse common data. And, a lot of times we think about that as our dimensional data. So region, product, customer, et cetera. We can reuse subject areas and topics that might have cross-analysis happening, right? So maybe our annual budgets, which are technically financial data, but we might have a whole bunch of different uses for them. So that kind of thing that might not necessarily be dimension data, but certainly is useful data to many different analysts and report creators throughout the organization. The other thing that you can do that's interesting with data flows is if you need to help people implement row-level security, if you've got some standard security mappings, right? People as they line up to departments or geographies or however, you can expose that in a data flow and help the downstream effort just a little bit. Now, we're not going to go down the technical road too far in this presentation today, but behind the scenes, data flows data is always stored in Azure Data Lake. And depending on how you set it up and you configure it, you can actually get to that data independently outside of Power BI if you want to, which takes your level of reusability of data even further, particularly if you have other Azure tools that you want to be able to access or even manage that data directly. You can do that. And here's where we got to be a little bit cautious, because I tend to get a little bit hesitant about advocating data flows as a full-fledged replacement for a data warehouse, right? I did data warehousing for a lot of years, and it can do a lot of things. So if you need an authoritative source, you need to combine data, you need to have a central area, and you don't have a data warehouse, this is a really good place to start if you have fairly straightforward needs. Just like we talked about earlier, this absolutely sends fewer queries down to your source systems. And if you start to extrapolate this out into dozens or more data sets that no longer have to hit a source system, that can be really helpful. Source systems that struggle with serving up analytical queries on top of an operational system, this is big. Source systems that have really limited availability, maybe you're only allowed to send those analytical queries between 2 and 4 a.m., that kind of thing. So anyways, fewer data set authors need access to the source systems if we centralize it in a data flow. And then finally, consistency is improved, as you would expect. So what I suggest is that you put as much as you possibly can into the data flow to reduce what the data set author needs to do. And I mean friendly table and column names, set your data types. If you have any calculated columns, right, the measures have to wait to the data set. But if you have calculated columns that need to be calculated columns, get them in there. If you've got unnecessary columns that aren't needed for display calculations or joins, get rid of them. The data set author can always customize later. So let me show you what this looks like very quickly. If we go to, I've got a workspace called Common Data, and I've got a data flow that I just called company-wide DW tables. And if we take a look at this here, I have 3 entities. So if we take a look at, we're not going to go too far with this, but really all I want to convey is that your authors that are familiar with Power BI Desktop and understand Power Query, this is a familiar interface, right? It's just Power Query Online. And if they want to still work in Power BI Desktop and then copy and paste the M script up to the data flow when they're done, that can be done because it's still just Power Query. It's just running in a browser. So let's take this one step further now and talk about composite models and the idea of bridging enterprise BI and self-service BI. So those 3 columns we started out with. Now, if we're talking about a regular old live connection, it does mean that all the data that you need has to be in that data source that you're live connecting to. So what if we said, we know we have a data source that has 90% of what we need, your staff, maybe from some Excel files, or, maybe from another web area, maybe even from another data flow. We can do that with this idea of direct query for Power BI dataset or Azure Analysis Services. Technically, that works as well. I'm just going to speak about it here from the Power BI perspective, though. So all the dotted lines here basically mean that we're connecting to the initial data set through direct query, and the reports are still going to do a live connection back to the secondary data set, the one that has a dependency on the top one, just like normal, just like we talked about. If we use an example here, let's say I've got an organizational sales data set. And it's been published up to the Power BI service, live connection and composite models. All this requires the data set to be published up to the service for any of this to work. Now, we might have started with direct query, but as soon as we want to do this, we are prompted in Power BI Desktop to flip the connection over to be direct query. So far, what I have in my composite model really is just a direct query up to what we call the remote model. But what I want to do is bring in that extra data, we'll call it my departmental data. And that then forms what we have a local model. And I've got some imported data as well. And that's why it's a composite model, because I've got a combination of direct query and a import, and a combination of the remote model and the local model. And the key here is all the data up here in the remote model, I'm not duplicating it. I'm not re-importing it into my departmental model. The one down here, I'm just hooking up to it and using it and then augmenting it with what I need. So this again, self-service BI enablement. We can extend an existing data model. And by the way, data model, data set, I use them interchangeably. We can add the new data sources, tables, new measures, new calculated columns, new hierarchies, right? All that stuff. We can even personalize if we need to. So let's say I need to reformat or rename a column or a measure from that original data set, right? Perhaps it's called sales returns and allowances. And I want to just call it returns in my local model. I can do that. Just be careful, right? If you're dealing with common definitions and that kind of thing, but that kind of thing is certainly possible. So again, this facilitates different people being able to manage different pieces of the puzzle here. Again, promotes the whole discipline at the core, flexibility at the edge, and less duplication of effort for data set authors, because they're just reusing that, whatever percentage of work is already up there, they don't have to redo it. Again, that reduces risk. I love that. All the same, kind of things that we talked about earlier. Now, you do have to realize we're querying a remote model. And although this is better than, say, when direct query goes against like SQL storage, right? This is still direct query against a in-memory Power BI data set. It's still taking another jump. So there's some performance impact, right? And it's a very new, young feature, still evolving, some limitations, lots of info online on, the Power BI site, their documentation site. Lots and lots of community bloggers talk about this as well. So there's no shortage of information. Just know that it's still very, very young. Before I move on to certification, are there any questions that we should handle?
Yes, actually, we do have a question from Johnny. And Johnny says, do users have access to the shared data set, also need access to the data flow, or can this be decoupled too, i.e. a data set author can access the data flows, but the report author can only access the data set?
So the shared data set author, yes, needs permission to be able to access the data flow. The report people only need to be able to view the data set. Plus, and we'll touch on this just briefly in a little bit, but plus anybody that's also a report author and not a consumer would also need the build permission on the data set, which is in addition to the view permissions or the read permissions to be able to create new content from it. So we've got some nice granular way to handle permissions, basically.
Yeah, let's hope that's answered your question. If you do have a follow-up, please put it in the chat. Thanks so much, Melissa.
So we've been talking about reusability of content. So one of the key things your brain has probably already started going to is, well, when do we certify content? Because as we encourage reuse of data, certification conveys to other users that this is validated in trustworthy data. So let's talk about this. And there are two types of endorsements in Power BI. One's called certification, and one is promotion. Certified, if I'm going to certify something, that should imply that some rigor has occurred because it's signifying the content is trustworthy. If you set something to promoted, that's more of an amplification that this content is available. And it doesn't mean that it's not trustworthy. It just means that it's something less than certified. Now, a lot of times, and I'll show you this here shortly, to be able to certify content, you have to have the ability to do so in the tenant settings. But anyone with edit permissions on, the data set, the report, whatever, can set it to be promoted. So a lot of times, certification is very tightly controlled to not only maybe a centralized team, but also some key subject matter experts that they are allowed to certify content. Whereas promotion is more freely used in kind of any decentralized department, especially if they have some challenges getting content formally certified, right? Very, very big company, that sometimes happens. So what that means is that how the promoted content is used can vary a lot, sometimes between departments and authors. Now, in recent months, the number of things that we can endorse has been increasing. We can endorse datasets, dataflows, the two types of reports, and we can also endorse apps, which means our set of reports and dashboards that have been added to an app. And what we can't currently endorse are dashboards, workbooks, or workspaces as a whole. Now, these distinctions between data, reports, and the set of items in an app is actually really important. And let me explain why. Let's talk about the meaning of a data certification. So if I'm going to say a data set is certified, what I'm saying to report authors is that you should be able to trust this data set and you are willing to accept it as a dependency for building your own reports. And that's because, right, the certified data set here and kind of the next level down is the report. So it's targeted to report authors. Now, data flows up here, its next level down are data sets. So that means we're targeting a data set author, and then kind of the same idea. You're willing to accept the dependency and trust this data flow as a source for creating your own data sets. So in both of these, we're targeting authors of content, either reports or data sets. Conversely, report certification, here we're thinking about the consumers of the report, and it's still about trustworthiness, but it's more about trusting the data to make business decisions off of it. So whereas data certification, we're focusing on our authors, report certification, we're focusing on our consumers. Is just kind of a bundle of go ahead and trust all of the reports that are within the app to make your business decisions. Certifying an app is kind of a one-click convenience inside the Power BI service. Let me show you a couple of things to that point. So if we go back to, I'm going to go to my Sales Analytics workspace here, and I'm going to sort by endorsements. And I've got in this report workspace, I've got 2 reports that are certified and 1 that is promoted. And notice that I've got a whole bunch of stuff being added to the app, which includes other reports that do not have an individual item certification. Okay, so note that I can have certified, promoted, or none in the workspace. I have set the app itself to be certified. So here on my apps menu, we can see that it's got the little certified symbol. And if I go and I just run the app, and none of my reports are really fancy, so, forgive that. What I can see at the top here is certified. This is inheriting that from the app certification. And no matter which report on the left menu I look at, it's still going to say certified at the top. So from a process perspective, I want you to be aware of that the app certification kind of says the whole thing. All of these reports are certified regardless of what's going on in the workspace. So that's something that you need to manage, and from a process perspective, kind of figure out a couple things. One is, should the workspace and the app always match? And that would be a good idea, especially if you got a lot of people that access both. The other key thing that you want to start thinking about is, if the product sales analysis report is certified. Now, I happen to know that it relies on, if I go back to my list view, it relies on a data set called, it's this one right here, sales data. And it does happen to be set to certified, but it's a separate thing, right? So from a process perspective, kind of deciding, do you require certified reports to also use certified data sets, that kind of thing. So lots of considerations for you to make there. If we want to do a get data, here I'll just do get data from Power BI datasets. And by virtue of setting the endorsement, your authors that are looking to create a new report and do a live connection back to a data set that's already published. Well, come on, pop up my little window. It's not hiding behind somewhere, is it? Nope, I don't think so. Well, when my dialog window pops up, they would be at the top so that they are more discoverable, just because the certified content is always at the top, followed by promoted content, followed by any other content, that the report author has permission to see. Let me show you one more thing before we move on, and that's in tenant settings. So there's a couple things to be cognizant of things that we've talked about so far. One is the certification itself, and that is here. It's under export and sharing settings. And here in my demo tenant, I have it set to a Azure AD group called Power BI Certification Subject Matter Experts. And that's who is allowed to certify content. Everybody else would see the radio button as being grayed out. So that's very important. The other things I'll hold off until we swing back in to cover those. So let's tack on just a little more to the story here. And now you're familiar with this exact thing with, one shared data set with multiple reports connecting via live connection. Where do we publish this content? And I propose that you think about publishing the data sets to a data workspace and the reports to a report workspace. That would allow you to do a few things. Your central people, so your BI, IT, COE type people, and also maybe your data authors for that particular subject area. So in this case, maybe sales, right? They could have the relevant workspace role on this data workspace. So admin, member, contributor. In the report workspace, your report authors also get a workspace role of admin, member, contributor, and the build permission on the initial data set up here. And this does a few different things for us advantage-wise. One is, because we're dealing with different workspaces, we have clarity on who's allowed to edit versus view. By the way, in this image, we've got the data flows in a separate workspace as well. Depending on your needs, there's a lot of people that advocate segregating those to be separate as well. But if you have ever found yourself with a bunch of data sets and reports in one workspace and told the people that are doing report authoring, it's basically the honor system. you can publish updated reports, but don't touch the data sets, right? This solves that. It also helps you with clarity on who owns and manages what. So if one team manages or even co-manages the data sets and another team is solely responsible for the reports, that kind of cross-team collaboration or just knowing who's responsible for what is fundamentally clearer this way. From a security perspective, if the people viewing reports down here in the workspace or in an app for that matter only have view permissions to the underlying data set, row-level security works. And if you ever found yourself in one workspace and you have permission to publish, so any edit permissions, because you publish reports, but now row-level security doesn't work because, well, the data set's also there, this solves that problem. And then the ability to assign the build permission can selectively be done. So you can either set read just on that for the viewers, that being the data set, or build for the authors. The disadvantage, of course, is just the fact that you have more workspaces. So some people with really huge tenants that have just a whole lot going on, it might be a lot to swallow to say, oh, you want me to have more workspaces. So kind of depending on how you manage it, that may or may not really be a big factor. So if we pop back over here, and if I take a look at my workspace list, and if I just do a search here, what I've done is I've just put data in my workspace search box, and really any of my workspaces that have the word data in it means that signifies to me it is a data workspace, and everything else is a reporting workspace. So for instance, in the sales area, here's sort of the data workspace, but then I've got a number of different workspaces that are set up, for different user populations or use cases, that kind of thing. In my sales analytics workspace, if I sort by type, I only have dashboards, reports, and workbooks. And that's because, of course, my data lives in the other workspace. So if we go back to the sales data workspace and I sort by type, I've got data sets, and you're like probably immediately saying, Melissa, why do you have reports in your sales data workspace? Well, I'm glad you asked. In fact, I have three things here: a dashboard, a report, and a data set. If we look at the dashboard first, really, it's just a message to say, hey, this is the data workspace. If I look at the sales data report, now this isn't pretty, but it's a quick change log. It's using the report pages that come along with the data set anyways for something useful. So here's a little change log, and here's some documentation, right? What's the data sources? What's the purpose? Are there custom business rules, right? Are there any future maintenance needs? Are there any open issues, right? Just anything like this that can just kind of tag along with the data set, and that can help not only you, but people in the future that need to understand what's going on. To our last piece of the puzzle, which is ideas for kind of helping report consumers understand what you've done already to create trustworthy content. The first thing is make sure your certification process is meaningful. You do need some level of rigor if it's going to be meaningful. For data certification, I propose that you look at the data sources, you look at the lineage, you give your data model a tech review, you look at security, and I mean not just row-level security, but also what's the target workspace security look like, maybe what the sensitivity label is going to be and what impact that might have, right? Think a little bit beyond just the PBIX there. Certainly your data accuracy validation. And if you have documentation that is required or recommended, taking a look at that, like maybe a required informational page. For reports, obviously report content, and then there still needs to be a slightly lighter data review, right? And how much lighter or how inclusive that is depends on, what the data behind it really comes from. Include report documentation. So I showed you kind of an ugly page that I keep meaning to redo and make a little more elegant, right? But important things to somebody that's consuming the content, right? And you could put this in the same report file if you want to. It could be part of tooltips, bookmarks, right? It could be actually literally part of the report consumption process. It could just be a little information link that takes you to a SharePoint wiki page, right? There's lots of different ways to actually do this. Just do it is kind of the suggestion. And then to a selective set of users, so not necessarily everyone, kind of depends, a change log of what changed when, by whom, in case they're seeing something changed and wondering what's up. And then what are your validation results and your data reconciliation process, right? So not every report consumer needs to see that kind of stuff, but maybe some. And with that, we can wrap it up for the final bit of Q&A. If anybody missed the link at the beginning to the presentations, or where the slide deck is, I should say, I'll put this up here for a minute, and we'll see if there are any final questions that we want to tackle.
Yeah, we do, Melissa. Thank you so much. Excellent session, by the way. Really appreciate you going through that and showing us all of the tips and tricks and how we should be thinking about our data. I think it's Chewy. Varela has a question. Would there be a restriction to certify an app if any of the reports within the app are not certified?
Yeah, there is no technical restriction. So if I go to my sales analytics workspace here, right, and if I look at endorsements, right, only 2 of my reports are certified, but I got a whole bunch of things that are actually included in the app. But if I go to this little ... where this is hiding out, and I click my edit app endorsement, sure enough, it's set to certify. So there's no actual technical restriction. So it's more about your process and kind of following how you want to handle that. I think if you exclusively deliver content through the app and hardly anybody sees it through the workspace, if there are some disconnects like that, okay, I can live with that. But if you have a fair number of users that really can go in either way, then I'd really want it to be, a little bit tighter and more in line with each other.
Okay, awesome. And we don't have any other questions, I believe.
So the last thing that I will mention, because I just realized I forgot to circle back and mention it, is that the other couple of tenant settings that are important to make a lot of the things work that I talked about. One is use data sets across workspaces. So that's important, of course, if we're going to span workspaces like I described. And normally, I would think that that's applicable to the entire organization. And the other one is allow live connections. That's another very key one to have enabled in order to make this work. And that's not only live connections from a Power BI report to a shared data set, but also live connection, which is, analyze in Excel, which is conceptually the same thing. And with regard to Excel, there's actually one other thing here, featured content, which if you're not just reporting on data, but you got some Excel data and you almost want to go grab it and do joins on it, essentially. That's what this featured content is about. And you can, open that up to some or all users as well. So make sure that you do a good review of your tenant settings to make sure it supports these kinds of things that we talked about.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We really appreciate you going through this today. And then do you have a link to, you've got all of your links there. We'd love to have those posted in the chat if you wanted to do that, so we can make sure that people can connect with you and follow you and learn so much more.
Well, thanks for having me, Kelly. This was fun.
Thank you so much again, Melissa. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever your time zone is. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Bye, everybody.